Thanks for tuning in. Today's podcast is brought to you by SmartBridge. Metadata-driven content management is establishing a new norm in how organizations manage their seemingly endless content. Access documents, files, and other content by focusing on the what instead of the where with solutions such as mFiles. Learn more at smartbridge.com.
Welcome back to this week's episode of the SmartBridge Transform IT podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Pauls, and today I'm joined with Zach Reynolds. Now, Zach is typically our producer, but he's joining me on the other side of the glass today. Hey, Zach, can you introduce yourself real fast?
Yeah, so I'm Zach, and as Patrick said, I'm the Transform IT producer. I have been lucky enough to be the producer for almost a year now, and it's good to be on this side of the glass and on this side of the microphone, so really excited to be here.
All right, well, thanks, Zach. Now, let's actually get into the important person that we're interviewing today, Lawrence. Now, Lawrence is the finance manager at UBC, and he's involved with JD Edwards. He's on the technical side, the finance side, and really he does a whole lot. But I would like to let him introduce himself and tell us a little bit about him and UBC and what the company does.
Yeah. Hey, good to have you here, Lawrence.
Yeah, hi guys. My name is Lawrence Evans. I work with United BioSource as a finance manager. So my background is in accounting, finance, but more recently IT work. So just a little bit about UBC. UBC is a CRO, so that means we're a clinical research organization that deals with clinical research, clinical trials, and implementation of how drugs can be used by different types of ailments.
Okay. And how long have you been with UBC?
I've been with UBC over the course of about 10 years through mergers and acquisitions, but roughly about 10 years with UBC as an organization.
Okay, very nice.
So a little bit before the call, or before the interview started, Lawrence and I were discussing a little bit, and he came up on the finance side, and you said that y'all were looking to kind of modernize your finance practices, and you were actually charged with picking a finance system and then ultimately implementing JD Edwards. Is that correct?
Yeah, so back in 2012, I believe, when UBC had gone through a few purchases and acquisitions, we needed to combine all of our systems into one. So the system that we obviously picked was JD Edwards, and I was the project lead on that project to implement our instance of JD Edwards, and I've since then managed the system.
All right, that actually sounds like a heck of a project. You know,
Yeah.
I've installed JD Edwards several times. I've done migrations and things, and that's really no small task or feat to undertake, especially for someone that doesn't have, you know, that comes from the finance background instead of
exactly.
technical background. Now,
getting thrown into the deep end of that was a fun project, especially since our business spanned over I think it was 7 different states at that time and 3 different countries. So that was kind of a new insight to how to do business for me.
And now you're the master of all the finance. So you do the technical side and the actual finance side. That's awesome. But that actually leads me into kind of the first question or topic I wanted to talk about today. And that's basically, so we talked about how, assuming you have JD Edwards on the financial side, but let's take a step back a little bit and open it up and say, hey, okay, so you manage your financial data with JD Edwards, but considering that you're a medical research company along with several other items, you know, can you talk a little bit about how you manage your data?
I'll answer like a layman's terms. We just manage our data just like every other company does. We have our data kept on secure servers. We use encryption and use different types of other firewalls and things like that to keep our data safe. Like you said, being a healthcare company, we have to apply by HIPAA rules and other type of regulatory procedures, but we understand that our data is important to us. That's how we drive our business, is by using the data to manipulate it and get information that helps our patients.
Okay.
So we take that information and give it to those clients. But as far as keeping our data safe, we're just like every other company. We just make sure that the data is safe, is kept secure. Only people who have access to it have the access that they need, and the people who actually need to get to it are the only people who can get to it. Like, say for me, as a finance person, I don't have access to get into our systems to look at patient information because I don't have the need to do that. So as a company, we value the information that we're given to us by our patients and our doctors. so that way we can go out and pitch our services to these folks, and they feel pretty confident that we'll keep their data safe and secure.
You touched briefly on HIPAA compliance, and I know that in the past we had talked about HIPAA and GDPR compliance. Do you mind briefly just going over that for those who may not be well aware of what that is?
Sure. HIPAA was a regulation passed by the United States in the 1990s, I believe, that makes sure that we keep our medical history safe and secure from everybody going in and looking at it. More recently, GDPR, which is a regulatory reform in the EU, they've implemented set regulatory procedure to protect all of their data, from banking to healthcare and everything like that. So in the EU, and hopefully soon in the US, they're taking data security as a pretty important thing. Obviously, with the more recent hacks and everything that's happening all over the planet, we're getting more cognizant about how secure our data should be. So hopefully the U.S. can follow some of the lead of the EU and implement something here, because in my opinion, we desperately need something at a governmental level that keeps the United States data secure, because we just can't keep having other countries and other foreign actors coming in and stealing our data.
Agreed.
Now, that actually brings up again another point, is that given that, okay, so you had HIPAA, now you have GDPR, and definitely there will probably be some additional regulation coming down here in the next couple of years. Can you kind of give a little insight into what tools you're using? How do you plan for those changes, and how some of that data management comes down, so that you can stay in compliance with all of these different rules, regulations, and laws as they change?
Yeah, so what we did after the Affordable Care Act passed is we hired on a staff of analysts who can come in and help us understand regulatory procedures. Because obviously with the Sunshine Act that passed within the Affordable Care Act, HIPAA rules and other things that are regulatory reforms, we have to be compliant with those things. And as a HIPAA shop that contains a bunch of patient information, we got to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So we hired on staff that analyzes all those regulations, because as a finance person or as operational people, we don't know how to interpret some of those rules and regulations. So we brought on staff to make sure that we are making sure that we're compliant with all of those rules and regulations. And as far as hitting our bottom line, yes, we understood that taking on those roles were going to be an additional cost. But honestly, the cost of paying some of those fines for breaking some of those HIPAA violations were so much more that it's so much easier to bring on new staff to guide us through some of those regulations that we need to hit, instead of trying to piece things together and try to avoid penalties. So we just bring people in who are experts on these fields that can help us implement policies and procedures that can keep everything safe and secure for us.
All right. Now you said you hired analysts and experts, and most of us would call that an audit team, but I like how you were much more delicate about that than I would have been. So I like working with those guys. At the same time, it's always a scary prospect when you get an email from one of them saying, "Hey, we found this hole. Y'all need to fix it."
Yeah, you never know what you're gonna get.
Well, for us, it's more than an audit, because we do get audited, and we have our internal auditors and external auditors. But for this particular project, we brought these people in to help us understand what these regulations mean and how we can implement policy and procedure before they took effect, so that we would be in compliance. Same thing that we did for the GDPR. Obviously, since we have organizations over in the UK, France, Spain, Germany, and a few other countries, we had to comply with GDPR. So since that passed in 2016, we had until 2018 to get everything ready. So that's why we brought on people to help us make sure that we implement and build procedures and processes that are in compliance with those rules and regulations in the EU. But we still get audited. Don't get me wrong. I do not like getting email from auditors either.
So besides augmenting your staff with subject matter experts and going through the policies and procedure side, were there any real changes in the technology or tools that you implemented along with those policies and procedures?
Absolutely. So from the finance side, obviously JD Edwards has a pretty robust security platform in it. So we can leverage that system for finances to make sure that all of that is safe. But as far as keeping all of our data safe for our HIPAA information and our patient information, we've built certain systems that help us and help our internal people organize the data, keep it safe and secure so that we can use that information and help and have it be useful to us. Because obviously information at that level can be a little bit daunting if you don't have it organized and in a system that can be manipulated well enough to use the information that we have. So we've built home-built systems. We've went out and bought products that make sure that we're giving the best product that we can to our customers.
So to kind of segue into that, I wanted to bring up clinical trials and how all this data that you guys have to manage at UBC, how that affects clinical trials, how do you record it, visualize this data, and how do you use that in preparation for the next clinical trial?
So obviously every clinical trial is going to be different. So to say that we use specific data from one study to the other might be a stretch. What we do is we take the information that we learn during those clinical trials and put that information towards how we run our trials or how we do our research. So say, for instance, we have a trial that says that this drug is used for ailment A. We go and use that research from doctors and from patients, from studies and trials, and we take that and we try to see what that drug can be expanded to, whether that be taking something that's simple like an aspirin and seeing what that can be used for, or taking something as complicated as a cancer drug and seeing what other treatments we can use that for. But as far as how we can how our trials influence how we go forward, it just basically influences how we do our business. So if we can learn from our prior studies and make sure that we don't make the same mistakes that we made in the past, we just make healthcare a little bit simpler, cheaper, and more efficient.
Understood.
All right. So one of the things that I've always wondered about is, with new graphics technologies and, a lot of different ways to visualize the data. One of the things I always wondered so you see these cool 3D models here and there, especially in the presentations that speakers give. But one of the things I was wondering is, as far as the data visualization goes, now when y'all are looking at your data, does it really stay, kind of standard with dashboards and metrics and stuff like that? Or do you do some really cool 3D rendering and modeling and, some of that next level cutting edge type of stuff?
Yeah.
So some of that, I'm not sure how much detail I can get into, but but it's just a combination of our systems, experience in the field. And like I said before, a lot of the credit goes to our staff. So they knew how to read that data and how to take the information and truly put that into reports to our clients so that they can take that information and say, okay, hey, we understand now that this drug can treat certain different things that we didn't know that it did before. But as far as visualizations and things like that, we use that for accounting and finance. Like in our financial system, we bolted on other things like Tableau and other reporting systems that we can do charts and pie graphs and 3D visualization for our senior leadership staff. But as far as the data goes for our clinical trials, that information we try to keep as simple as we can so that we can take that information, report it back up to our clients so that they can take that information and use it for their internal purposes. As far as building graphs and charts and everything, it's just not something that we really focus on for the clinical trials.
Okay. So you briefly touched on this a little bit beforehand, and I want to kind of circle back and see if you could maybe give a little bit more data. But one of the things that we were talking about is that you take one clinical trial, one study, you record data, you produce this this body of data, and then you use it moving forward, and you keep building on this body of data. One of the things that I specifically have been wondering about is as far as actionable information. So you said, okay, cool. You do something, you used aspirin as an example. It can be used to treat this, and we found out that it may have some effect on that. Can you give us a little insight into the process on, okay, so you've developed all of this data. Now, how do you kind of extrapolate the actionable information from that, and how, and do you use similar methods as you were mentioning when you go to the finance side?
Honestly, our people. our people come from backgrounds and many different places in the healthcare industry. So we hire the best people. They know what to do when they're looking at research, and they can see data. They can follow trends. They understand what a drug is doing or what types of patients react to certain drugs. So we rely on our people really to take the information that we keep to make the rational decisions that we put in our reporting and that we give to our clients and our patients. Yes, we have good enough systems that keep all that organized so that when they have a question or if they need to go look something up, they can easily go to that system, query on, let's say that they want to query on pancreatic cancer. They can go into our system, query pancreatic cancer, and it'll bring up everything that's related to pancreatic cancer, whether it be drugs or different studies that we've done. So they have a breadth of information available to them relatively quickly. But as far as how they implement and use that information, that just comes from their expertise, because we hire really, really good people. Not to prop our company up, but we try to hire the best people because we understand that what's at stake, and what's at stake is people's health care. So we want to make sure that we bring in the right people who understand the data and can make really good decisions and provide good clarity for our customers.
Right, and you had touched briefly on related to the overall patient care and how your people at UBC impact that. So have you seen big improvements, tangible improvements on patient care specifically, based on improvements in data usage?
Every day. So through our partnerships, we've been able to gather a lot of data. So between all of our acquisitions and the bigger companies that we were a part of, we've been able to levy that information and transfer that into actionable data for our customers. So if a client comes in and say that we want you guys to research this drug and try to tell us what we can do better about it, we do that. We turn that around within a year or two, or how long the study is, and give the information back to the client so that they can go out and market their drug for something else. Or if it's something as basic as treating a customer. So sometimes we might do research on a drug, and it might be a drug that you might have to use a needle to inject yourself with. But over time, we might do research on that drug and say that, hey, we can make this into maybe an aerosol spray or something that you can take with a pill versus having to take an injection. So we see those types of benefits from our studies every single day, which over the course of time makes patients' lives a little bit better and makes them more compliant to use their drugs. Because at the end of the day, if people don't take their drugs, then we're kind of back to square one. So
Right.
We try to make sure that we're making sure that people have better access to their health care, better ways to take their drugs, and honestly better health care, so we can inform them better on if a drug can do something else for them.
Well, I'm not one of these people, but on behalf of all people that have to use needles on a regular basis, I'm assuming that they appreciate the fact that you're looking into ways to get rid of needles and make it more accessible and easier to take those medications. So thank you, good sir.
I'm the same way. I come from a healthcare company and I hate needles. So all those guys and doctors who do all this work are helping us out. And so that for people like me and you, we don't have to deal with needles when we do have to take medication.
All right, Lawrence. So that's pretty much all we have for you today. But thank you for that insight. And one of the big takeaways that I have is that your people are the cornerstone of your company. I know a lot of people say that in a cheesy way, but it sounds like the subject matter experts plus the technology basically form a whole ecosystem that allows you to actually make strides and accomplish things. And before we go, I wanted to ask two questions. And the first one of which is there something that you know that you think everyone else should know but doesn't?
I think it's fitting for what we're going through as a country right now, compromise. So obviously as an IT person, I have to compromise and work with our operational staff because obviously I'm spending money on something that they don't get to see every day. So spending millions of dollars on IT infrastructure and for security software and things like that, a lot of them don't understand why we have to do that. So it really just comes down to making compromises and agreements with your team and making sure that everybody's on the same page. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've learned after going through this project is having to compromise and working with your coworkers.
All right. And then my second follow-up question, which you almost touched on, is, okay, what's one thing that you've learned, or what's the most important thing technically speaking, that you've learned in the past year?
Flexibility. Obviously, a bunch of companies are doing consolidations and are being split off and doing a bunch of things that institutes change. So a lot of the things that I've learned over the past year and a lot of the things that our staff has learned over the past year after being a divested company of a much larger company is flexibility. So we're going through tons and tons of changes. And the biggest thing that I tell my people every single day is be patient, be flexible with the changes that are happening. Because change is good, but change is hard. So the flexibility with your staff and how they work with you and work within those changes are one of the biggest things that I hope to expect for any staff or anybody who I ever work with.
Right. Yeah, I think those are two pretty good takeaways we can leave our listeners with in this realm. So patience and, patience and flexibility and compromise, you said. I like that.
Yeah. And if we all implemented those, we'd all probably be better people. So those are some great takeaways. Thank you, Lawrence.
Yeah,
hey,
thank you so much.
and me both. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Well, that's all the time we have for today. So thank you, Lawrence. This is your host, Patrick Pauls, joined by our producer,
Zach Reynolds. Thank you so much for letting me be on this side of the glass and getting to get my feet wet in the microphone aspect of it today. Thank everyone for joining us. Give us a like and share wherever you found us. iTunes, SoundCloud, Facebook, across all social media platforms. And we will talk to you guys soon.
Go out and create something exceptional.
Yep.